Hello.
Hello.
Can you guys hear me
We-
okay?
Hello.
We can. We are live.
I see that. Yep.
Whenever you're ready.
Okay, perfect. I'm sorry, I'm trying to pull the, give me one moment. All right, so I'd like to call this meeting to order. This meeting will be conducted in accordance with the State of California Executive Order N-29-20 dated March 17th, 2020. All members of the subcommittee are participating in this meeting by video conference with no physical meeting location. Members of the public wishing to observe the meeting live may do so on YouTube at mountainview.gov/YouTube. As noted on the meeting agenda, members of the public may provide oral public comments online during the public comment period for an item by signing up at mountainview.gov/CSREI_speakers or by phone by dialing 669-900-9128 and entering the webinar ID, which is 963-2648-3935. This meeting is scheduled to end at 7 p.m. and we have a large number of attendees. In order to ensure that we are able to hear from all speakers and progress through the meeting, speakers will be allowed up to 90 seconds to speak. Any emails received by 2 p.m. today were forwarded to the subcommittee. Emails received after 2 p.m. will not be read during the meeting, but will be entered into the recording for the meeting. So I'll move on to item 2, which is roll call by Audrey Seymour Ramberg, our Assistant City Manager.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Kamei. Chair Kamei.
Here.
Member Abikoga.
Here.
Member Ramirez.
Here.
Great.
Thank you. All members are present.
Great. I'll move on to item number 3, which is oral communications. This portion of the meeting is reserved for persons wishing to address the subcommittee on any matter not on the agenda. Speakers are allowed to speak on any topic for up to 90 seconds during this section. State law prohibits the subcommittee from acting on any non-agendized items. Would any member of the public on the line like to provide public comment on the item that is not on the agenda? If so, please raise your hand in Zoom or press *9 on your phone. Right, I see 3 folks. And Ms. Seymour Ramberg, will you be keeping time or will that be Mr. Gaines?
I will do that.
Okay, perfect.
It will not be displayed on the screen, but I will verbally indicate when the 90 seconds have elapsed.
Great, thank you very much. Our first speaker is David Peters. Please feel free to unmute yourself. Oh, did they disappear? Does anyone else see David? No? Okay. We'll move on to Annette Lynn.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you, subcommittee. And so I'm a member of the Mountain View Human Relations Commission. And last night we held a report out session for a project that's been ongoing for the past summer and fall, the last couple of months. And Audrey Seymour Ramberg has been really great support, as well as other city staff, especially the MCOP. We had almost 100 folks participate with us last night, which was really great. And we got to tell them a little bit about our engagement process and our findings. So I just wanted to let the public know that our next steps in this project with our police and community relations subcommittee is a report to the December 1st city council meeting. And there we'll share our findings with the Mountain View Police Department as well as city council. And I believe our chair, Ida Rose Sylvester will also be on this call about an upcoming December 2nd civility roundtable that we'll be hosting. That'll be about implicit bias. So we want to really continue to engage with the public about this topic. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Annette. We'll move on to our next public speaker, which is Ida Rose Sylvester. Please feel free to unmute yourself, Ida Rose.
I have promoted Ida Rose to panelist because her version of Zoom does not permit her to speak otherwise.
Okay. All right, Ida Rose, you're on mute and there you go.
Apologies for that. I have no idea why that happens in certain forms of meetings, but I'm Ida Rose Sylvester, the chair of the Human Relations Commission, and I'd like to extend everybody on the call a welcome to our upcoming Civility Roundtable on Implicit Bias. It is called Believing is Seeing, the Power of the Mythology of Race. We're holding that on Wednesday, December 2nd on Zoom, starting at 6:30 p.m. The point of this is to talk a little bit about what implicit bias is, helping people gain an understanding and knowledge of how implicit bias impacts their life and about their own implicit bias that they have towards others. But the purpose of this event is really to engage in a dialogue that talks about how implicit bias affects our community and to collaborate in small groups around what we can do as a community to work on implicit bias together. You can register for this event at believingisseeing.eventbrite.com. believingisseeing.eventbrite.com. Thank you very much. Have a great evening.
Great, thank you very much. Okay. David Peters, please feel free to unmute yourself.
Perfect. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Wonderful. Good evening. My name is David Peters. I'm a member of the Mountain View Coalition for Police Reform and Accountability. Since June, we've called for a resident-led task force to examine MVPD's policies and budget, and we have recently developed 2 additional calls to action. Our first call to action is to remove all law enforcement from school campuses in Mountain View by the start of the 2021 to 2022 school year. There is strong community support for this, most recently demonstrated during last night's Human Relations Commission meeting. Over the last few months, as previously mentioned, the HRC has been gathering community stories about policing in Mountain View, and last night they identified 82 positive mentions of police interactions and 266 negative interactions. Regarding SROs, there were only 3 mentions of support for the program, which all came from parents rather than students. And on the other hand, there were 41 mentions of concern over whether police involvement was appropriate. At the high school district level, students, teachers, and alumni have petitioned the MVLA board to remove law enforcement from all campuses in the district, and to date, that petition has close to 1,000 signatures. And last night, in our sister city, Los Altos, the Citizens Police Task Force voted to recommend the elimination of the Los Altos High School SRO program. The community has spoken. We do not want cops in our schools. Please listen to the community and remove law enforcement from school campuses by the start of the 2021 to 2022 school year. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. All right. Eva Tang, please feel free to unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes. Did she disappear? Oh, there we go. Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. Maybe it's switching between.
We can hear you now.
Oh, okay. Are you unable to hear me in the, hold on. Are you able to hear me right now?
We can hear you now.
Okay, cool.
Yep,
Okay.
I hear you.
That was weird. Okay. Good evening. It's Eva Tang. I'm also here on behalf of MVCPRA. Thanks to David for sharing our first call to action. And our second call to action is to provide city level support for Santa Clara County's Mobile Crisis Response Team, or the MCRT, with the eventual goal of routing all nonviolent 911 mental health calls directly to unarmed mental health first responders rather than police. We understand that they are stretched thin. MCRT is only 11 licensed clinicians responding countywide, especially as calls have more than doubled in recent months. And that's exactly why we've identified the first step as providing city level support, whether it's through budget or personnel. But we need to act now. In 2018, a civil grand jury found that of the 31 people killed in Santa Clara County officer-involved shootings between 2013 and 2017, 30% suffered from a serious mental illness. And of the 56 total police shootings during that period, including non-fatal shootings, 40% involved a mental health crisis. It doesn't have to be this way. So providing city-level assistance to MCRT could go a long way towards making sure cops do less and not more, which was a common sentiment shared during last night's HRC meeting amongst many of our residents. And not to mention, this is the right thing to do to protect our most vulnerable residents. So instead of playing the blame game and arguing over mental health,
Thank you. Your time is up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Our next speaker is Trini Inoue.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good evening. My name is Trini, and I'm also here on behalf of MVCPRA. As David said, since June, we have called for a resident-led task force to review MVPD's policies and budget. Tonight, city staff is recommending a public safety advisory board, which is tasked with holding even more public forums. This will be in addition to the city council and town hall meetings where hundreds of community members spent countless hours voicing their concerns, and the HRC listening forums, during which there were 266 expressions of the need for improvement from MVPD. The community has showed up time and time again to ask the city for change. So after 5 months of public forums, it's disappointing and frustrating to hear the city say they still haven't heard enough. But maybe we do need to keep talking about this because sometimes it seems like the city and the public are having two different conversations. The reason the report gives for not choosing a more rigorous oversight model is that Mountain View hasn't had an officer-involved shooting yet and doesn't suffer from deeply eroded public trust. The report uses the word trust 18 times, but accountability is only mentioned 7 times. This conversation that we're having is not just about trust. This is about right and wrong. It's wrong that students go to school in fear of SROs. It's wrong that people experiencing a crisis see a cop before they see a mental health expert. And it's wrong to prioritize good PR over accountability. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any phone numbers called in, and I think that's everyone's hands. So I will move this back to item 4, which is minutes approval. I don't know if my colleagues have a motion or comments.
No comments. I'm happy to motion to approve the minutes.
Great.
I'll second motion.
Great. So I look to Ms. Seymour Rampert. Can we just do hands or do you need a roll call vote?
I'll do a roll call vote.
Can I take a public comment before we do that?
Yep. All right. So we have a motion and a second. I see a hand. So Eva, do you have comments on the minutes?
No, I don't know why that my hand is still raised. Sorry.
Okay, no problem. Okay. So I see no public comment on minutes approval, so I'll turn it back to you.
All right, I believe there's a motion and a second on approval of the minutes. Chair Kamei,
Yes.
Member Abikoga,
Aye.
Member Ramirez,
Yes.
motion passes.
Great. So that motion passes unanimously. We can move on to item number 5, which is business items. It's 5.1, the update and discussion of the Race, Equity, and Inclusion Action Plan. This item includes updates from the HRC's community engagement on local policing, the MVPDX Community Police Educational Program, and the MVPD Research Fellow. This item also includes a presentation of staff's recommendation regarding a community police oversight model for Mountain View. Subcommittee members will ask any questions they have following each of the presentations. The public comment period will follow the conclusion of committee member questions related to the staff's recommendation on community police oversight model. So I will turn it over to item A, which is an update of action plan efforts. Mr. Melvin Gaines.
Good evening, Chair Kamei and members of the subcommittee and members of the public. Wanted to begin tonight by providing an update on what the city has been up to since we last met October 5th. As we do have one of the components of the action plan is for celebration and recognition of diversity, and the Mountain View Library put on a number of events to do so. They hosted renowned author Jemiah Wilson for a discussion on race, and they also held a two-part series on the neuroscience of implicit bias. Other advisory body boards have done a lot as well, planning events for the upcoming year, with the HRC, as you know, doing the HRC listening forums, which we'll hear more about from the Assistant City Manager. In addition to that, we've primarily been focused on the policing matters. Tonight, you will hear an update from the HRC community listening forums, learning more about what happened last night. You'll also hear an update from Deputy Chief Chris Shung on MVPDX, and he'll introduce you to our new research fellow who's going to help us further analyze much of our MVPD contact data, as well as help us to identify ways to better analyze Mountain View police data. Instead of me trying to update, I'll actually just pass it now to Audrey Ramberg to provide an update on the HRC listening forum.
Thank you, Melvin. I'm going to share my screen. Are you able to see? Great.
Yes.
Well, we're not at the right part. Let's get to the right part. Good evening. As staff liaison to the Human Relations Commission, I have been working for the past several months with an ad hoc subcommittee, two of whose members spoke to you under oral communication. And we have been working to engage the public regarding the experience of interacting with police in Mountain View. To help plan and facilitate the engagement, the city hired the Peninsula Conflict Resolution Center, which is a local community-based organization who has a long history of expertise in this area. We launched the engagement process in August, and it concluded with a report out session last night that has already been referenced. I'm going to provide a brief update to the Council Subcommittee on Race, Equity, and Inclusion at this time. And then the HRC will make a more detailed presentation to the full council on December 1st as part of the staff's comprehensive update on the Race, Equity, and Inclusion Action Plan, and also the work of your subcommittee. PCRC's written report on the findings from the engagement process will be included in the packet for the December 1 agenda. So the objectives for the engagement process were twofold. First, to hear the stories of people in Mountain View about their experiences interacting with our police department, and then to share the information from those stories with the City Council and with the police department. The process wasn't designed as a rigorous academic research project or tasked with developing specific policy recommendations. However, it does provide insight on the experiences and perspectives of a number of people in Mountain View whose voices might otherwise not have been heard. And thus it gives us an opportunity for areas to further explore and improve. The process aimed to engage people who live, work, and visit or spend time in Mountain View who have had direct experience with police in Mountain View. We did extensive outreach to inform people about the opportunity to participate and to encourage that participation with the multilingual community outreach program, using their networks and doing one-on-one contact to people who are Spanish speaking and Mandarin speaking. We did emails to dozens of local organizations, multiple rounds of posting through social media, posting of flyers, and other methods. And we provided people a few different ways that they could make their stories heard. First, we had virtual listening forums with small group dialogues. We also had an online portal in which people could submit their written stories, and then we did one-on-one interviews. The forums were designed to reach different constituent groups, with one in Spanish, one held in Mandarin, one held in English, and one focused on youth. The interviews were done to connect with people who might tend to be harder to reach, including homeless and unstably housed residents, as well as interviewing local business people and nonprofit leaders. For each of these methods of gathering stories, we asked people to describe the interaction that they've had with Mountain View Police, what happened, what went well, what didn't go well, and what they might like to see either reinforced in the future or done differently. So we had 181 stories collected through these various participation methods. And what our partner, Peninsula Conflict Resolution Center, did was to review the notes from the forums and also the written online story submittals and the transcripts from the interviews, and identify keywords that they then grouped into themes, and then they counted each time a theme was present in one or more of the stories. Now, some stories could have multiple themes, a combination of potentially positive, negative, and neutral themes, even within the same story. And the stories and the themes in the stories can overlap and interrelate. While an analytical approach was used, it is true that with narrative expressions like this, there is some subjective judgment in how to group and label the themes. So it's important also to bear in mind that the stories that we collected were from what you might call a convenience sample. That's of people who are willing and able to share their experiences. Participants were not selected in such a manner to try to represent the community at large. And it's likely that participation may have been limited on the one hand by emotional challenges that those with experiences perceived to be negative might have in sharing their story. And on the other hand, by the lack of motivation that people might have felt to share stories that were positive or neutral. So the point to make from that is that the findings from the engagement process, it's not possible to generalize those to the Mountain View population as a whole, or to particular subgroups within the Mountain View population. However, they still do present a robust set of experiences and that really reflect the lives and the lived experiences of and voices of a number of people in Mountain View. So what I'd like to do in the last two slides is to share the expressions that of satisfaction and the expressions of concern and need for improvement that have been grouped into the themes. Starting, and in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through all of these. You can see them here on the screen. I'll go through the first few on each slide. In the expressions of satisfaction, the most frequent were general expressions of satisfaction where detail was not provided about what the nature of the interaction was, but the storyteller shared appreciation for and satisfaction with the work of the police. In the next theme, which was positive community relations, these were stories where police presence in the community built trust and left a positive impression. In the next theme of helpful police assistance, these were stories where the service provided by the police solved a problem or addressed an issue in a way that was helpful for the storyteller. And then the last one I'll read is the pleasant police interactions. And these are stories where the storyteller experienced the police officer's behavior in a way where they were friendly and caring. Moving on to expressions of concern and need for improvement. Again, I'm not going to read all of these, but you can see them here on the screen. The most frequent of the themes is labeled as behavior that the storyteller experienced as domineering, where the storyteller felt that the police acted in a way that was rude or arrogant or bullying. The next theme is race-based and biased policing, where a storyteller felt that the police contacting someone or the way that they treated someone or the assumptions that they made were based on race or socioeconomic conditions. The next theme is police not the appropriate personnel. And these are stories where police were called, but another type of help was wanted. The storyteller wanted there to be someone else that they could call instead of the police. There was a mention earlier in public comment that this is where comments about dissatisfaction with the presence of school resource officers in schools are, but that's not all 41 mentions. This also includes a number of stories where people wanted to have an alternative resource for addressing mental health needs. The next theme relates to the need for police training. And these are stories where people suggested police training in order to improve interpersonal skills by officers in general, or in order to address particular police behaviors that the storyteller felt were problematic. And then the next theme is lack of trust in police, which are stories where people felt threatened by the way that the police was present in the situation, or said that they didn't want to contact the police for fear that the situation would escalate. So I'm going to stop there in reviewing these themes, and that does conclude the presentation that I prepared for you tonight. Just as an update, these same themes were shared with the community during the report out session that was referenced by both the HRC members and by the public, which was held last night. And these themes will be described in greater detail in the written report that I mentioned and the presentation that HRC will make of that report to the full council on December 1st. And with that, I'm available for questions if you want to do that now, or Chair, if you'd like to wait until the other updates are provided.
Sure, we can see.
Looks like we have lost the chair. There you are.
Hello, sorry, am I back?
Yes.
Sorry that it cut me out. Do subcommittee members have questions? I see hands, so I'll go to Councilmember Ramirez first.
Thank you, Chair Kamei. Just one question. So for the expressions of concern and satisfaction, do we also collect demographic data for anyone who is, and then my apologies if I missed that. So there's demographic data for each. Okay, great. And so.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I'm nodding that I'm hearing your question, and no, you did not miss it. We do not have demographic information across all data sources and all stories. We did not, well, when people registered for the Zoom forums, they had the option to provide that information. We also had polls within the forums, but people did not across the board participate in those polls. In the online story, we did not ask that information, although some people volunteered it in the course of telling their story. And in the one-on-one interviews, there were some observations that the interviewer could make with regard to the race or other demographics of the interviewee. But we do not have those frequencies divided by demographic, and we would not be able to provide that.
Okay, so just generic demographic information for the participants who chose to share it, but we're not able to provide, if we were to sort of put all of this on the table, we couldn't say, here's where these expressions fall
Right.
based on
Right.
ethnicity. Okay.
And we
Got it.
can't unfortunately even say that of all, so there's 181 stories. That wasn't 181 people, because there were a few people, not very many, but a few people who gave more than one story of different interactions that they'd had with the police. And so of those 181 stories, we would not be able to tell you how many of those stories were of different demographic backgrounds. And also we cannot break up the findings in that way. The one thing that I could say, because we did have forums that were specific to language, that in the Spanish speaking listening forum, I don't believe we had themes that stood out in a way that was remarkably different for that, from the population as a whole. And I'm sure that when this gets presented to the full council in December, if we have the ability to say more on that, we'll be prepared to do so. But we did have outreach that we did that indicated that there was reluctance to participate in the process on behalf of many people in the Spanish speaking community because of feelings of fear and just not being sure, was it okay to come and talk in an open and honest way about their experiences, if not, sometimes not even just here, but in other places. And then the other thing I would say is that for the Mandarin speaking listening forum, there were differences for that group compared to the results overall across all subgroups and all forms of story submittal, in that the experiences shared and the expressions were uniformly positive.
Great, thank you. That's very helpful.
Great, thank you. Mayor Abekoga?
Thank you. My question was actually very similar to Councilmember Ramirez's, and just, I guess, more specifically, I don't think I saw it in the staff report, but are there just numbers in terms of participants for each of the different listening forums that we had?
It was not in your report. That there's some summary of the themes from the engagement process in the report that Melvin will share. It did not include participation numbers. There were 87 participants in all of the listening forums, and the written report will say how that broke down between the four. And if I can just take 1 second, I will reference that to tell you that it was 45 in the English speaking forum, 15 in the youth forum, 10 in the Spanish speaking forum, and 17 in the Mandarin speaking forum.
Great. Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Great, thank you. And then I just have 2 things. One is, I know that the full report will be given to council on the 1st, but I know that there was conversation of also trying to make sure that this information lives on the REI website. Is that true? Are we going to try to make that available as well?
So the Human Relations Commission Subcommittee is doing kind of the last rounds of edits and finalization of the report and a transmittal, which is a brief summary. I don't have a specific date by which that will be done and posted, but what I can do, if it is of use, is to post the slides that I presented this evening on the REI webpage, which will give kind of the big top line on the themes, and then the report itself will obviously get into more detail, and as well as talking about the process and the methodology and the limits of the data and all those good things that you include with a report of that nature.
Great. I think, I don't know if we need to do a straw poll on that, but I would be interested in kind of having that information available. I see Mayor Abakoga, your hand is back up.
Sorry, I had one more question. So in the forums, when you had the various responses, positive and negative, were those all firsthand experiences, or were there some that were, people conveying other people's experiences or what they thought might have happened if it was someone else? I didn't watch, to be honest. I'll be all frank, a little busy. I didn't get to watch them, but I had heard from some participants about what happened. And so I just wanted to, understand, are these all firsthand experiences that were conveyed or not?
Thank you for that question. The intended participation was for people who have had experience with local police, not people who are, concerned about policing in general or had experience in other locations. And so people were asked to tell their stories. It is true that some of the stories were provided by perhaps, say, a service provider who observed the way the police interacted with, say, an unstably housed person visiting a Hope's Corner, for example. That's an example where somebody was presenting a story that was their story and that they observed it, but it wasn't something that happened directly to them. But in that kind of the concept of police presence in the community, there were stories where people were observing police in the community without it being a direct personal interaction. And there were a couple of stories that were openly saying, I don't have an experience, but here's what I think should happen for policing reform. And those were not counted as part of the themes.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. I don't see any more hands. I do see hands in the attendee box, and I just want to let folks know we are hearing the various reports, and then we'll move to public comment. So I just want to remind folks that have their hand raised that we will hear from you. We're just making our way through. So shall I turn it back to you, Mr. Gaines?
Sure, thank you. And also, we wanted to provide an update to another outreach effort that we did over the last couple of months, in addition to bringing on a research fellow. And I will pass the floor to Deputy Chief Shung to provide updates on those two areas.
Good evening, Chair and members of the subcommittee and members of the audience. As I try to multitask here and pull up and share my screen, bear with me. Just want to confirm that you can see the presentation.
Yes, we can see
Okay,
it.
great, thank you. I wanted to just give a little bit of a chance here, and before I do, Deputy Chief Shung serving here, and soon to be taking over in the role of Police Chief at the end of December. And I'm glad to be here and give you just a chance and an opportunity to share a little bit about a program that we held over the past couple months. I do want to say that we've had a long history of listening and engaging and being a part of our very vibrant community. We very much enjoy all of the different opportunities that we've had to interact with our community, especially the ones pre-coronavirus, and I look forward to the day that we can do that again. MVPDX was originally modeled after a Stanford Hospital engagement program where community leaders and executives basically attended like a 2-day program where they learned about the hospital. So kind of following that format, we set up, and this actually took place earlier in a pre-coronavirus environment where we were able to give a 2-day experiential kind of show and tell, if you will, to a cohort of people. So we've been doing that. And then unfortunately, in the immediate aftermath after the death of George Floyd, we've started to receive numerous requests for more information on what we do, how we train, and ultimately how that impacts the community. We recognized that we needed to create a space for community members to come and speak to us. directly about their questions and their concerns, and learn and digest this information and have direct access to subject matter experts, not only to receive answers to their questions, but also to discuss with us their vision, their thoughts, and hopes when it comes to what policing might look like in Mountain View, so that ultimately we could be leaders in our profession, and not only in the region, but across the country. So utilizing the bones of kind of the earlier program that I mentioned to you, we basically tweaked it because now we're in a coronavirus shutdown environment. So we understood that we had to somehow create a virtual environment to do the same thing. We retooled the program to have a focus instead on more of a collaborative discussion around the current state of policing, community policing, and bias in the police. And these were three themes that we were seeing consistently in conversations we were having with the community members. And I should note, even in the days over the summer, I too, myself and many members of our leadership team fielded many phone calls and spent a lot of time just speaking with members of the public on issues and concerns such as these. As you can see here, we built the program to be very much of a listening and learning environment where community participants would be able to ask us questions and share concerns in a safe space. And in turn, we could discuss with them policing in Mountain View and share our goals and vision as it relates to our community, and hear from them about collaborative efforts and potential for improvements to truly make us to be at the forefront of progressive policing. So it wasn't an environment where we wanted to basically preach at anybody. We were very much in a high listening mode ourselves to find out more about how the community felt. Initially, the program was built out into 7 days, primarily taking place over Zoom, and with the final day being one that the participants would build themselves based on what had been discussed and what they'd wanted to explore earlier. So week to week, as certain topics rose to the top, some might get parking lotted and returned to, and some maybe the cohort felt they didn't have as much interest in, so they would move on. So it's very much dictated a lot by what the group wanted to hear. To build out the program and to work out the growing pains, we initially handpicked.
You're just a little choppy.
Oh, okay. Should I slow down or wait for it to?
I don't, I thought it was just me, but it's not.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a little, like we hear you, but it's staticky.
Okay. Let me see what I
So
can.
I don't know, maybe if it's your headset or.
Let's see. How much of that did you get?
I mean, we can hear you.
Okay.
And we can mostly understand it. But I just wanted to let you know.
Okay.
Before you continued.
Right.
I was just troubleshooting on my end to see if it was just me.
Okay, let me, I can't think of what else I can do. Let me kill some browser windows and applications in the hopes that maybe it is a buffering thing. I will not kill PowerPoint, so that would be bad. Is it any better now?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay.
Great.
All right. Apologies for that. The wonders of technology.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, please let me know if it breaks up or if I need to repeat any sections.
Sure.
Okay, just to give you some background on the first cohort, this cohort consisted of local police reform activists, to include a couple from the MVCPRA, concerned community members who had contacted us over the summer, including a member of the faith-based community, a mental health advocate, and also designed to incorporate and ensure that people of color had a strong voice to be able to be heard when we discussed the themes that were sparking national dialogue and that we were hearing reverberated at a local level. So these themes of bias, community policing, the current state of law enforcement, and its future. These, we understand, can be very emotional conversations, and one of the key features that we built into the program was that it be adaptable, particularly in the age of COVID-19, with modifications to allow us to do mostly virtual via Zoom, with a couple safe, select in-person experiential days. It also allowed us to stop, slow down, or speed through different topics depending on the cohort's interest. With those parameters, officers within the department would join twice weekly conversations, either from their office or their homes, to listen in with the group, a total of 10 different residents to start, hear their concerns, and as allowable, share their own stories, feedback, and apply teaching moments. So pretty much every member of the leadership team and many members of the department kind of rotated through and just shared from their own areas of subject matter expertise. In addition, the cohort had what we called PD partners, and basically police department members that were paired up with them. So even outside of this opportunity, they could basically reach out, text them, and have further conversations on any topics that they were had wanted to know more about.
So Chief, is there any way you can take like the headset off?
I can switch to, let me try to switch to a different, all right. Apologies. I'm going to stop sharing just for a second to try to troubleshoot that. Okay.
I hear you very clearly.
Sound better.
Is that better?
Yes,
Yeah.
Okay.
so much better.
So wonderful that I spent all that money on a nice high-tech headset. It's not working. Okay, my apologies. I'm going to go back to sharing the screen to finish that out. One sec.
Great, thank you. Thanks for working with us.
Gotta love Zoom, right? So
Yes.
okay.
Perfect.
All right, and you can see the screen?
Yes, we can see the screen.
Okay, so just in the final two slides here, let me skip down here. So although we were only slated for 7 sessions as the final day approached, it turned out that it was meant to be a marathon discussion around 3 different themes, right? Police, bias in policing, policing presence, and police community collaboration. The cohort and the members of the police department had very frank discussions about what it meant to continue this conversation. And the cohort provided additional feedback, stating that they wanted to have even more time to really talk and drill down even more on these different types of changes and ideas. We learned from the cohort that more time wasn't just needed, it was wanted, and that the group wanted the opportunity to connect, to converse, and to collaborate. Despite all these differences and different mindsets, mentalities, and backgrounds, something really came out of this was just the desire to interface, to talk, to come to the table and listen and really have genuine dialogue and conversation. So there were a lot of profound discussions on topics such as school resource officers, pretextual stops, mental health outreach. And while this work is really only beginning, these conversations were pivotal for all of us to better understand the different suggestions that are out there. So I really do appreciate the collaborative nature of the participants that were there. And to just wrap it up, where we go from here, that was a question that we heard a lot through this process, what comes next? And basically what's going to come out of this is we plan to have another cohort in January, and we are taking applications. So if you're interested, please by all means reach out to us on a number of our different social channels or email us, police@mountainview.gov. And part of the way this is set up is that one of the graduates, if you will, is a designated ambassador that's been selected by their peers, who will then carry on and be part of the second cohort to help guide those conversations. So that wraps up my presentation. I do apologize for the technical difficulties, and I'm open for any questions if anybody has any.
Great, thank you. I will turn it back to the subcommittee to see if they have any questions. Do either of my subcommittee members have questions on this? Okay. All right, Mayor Abikoga.
Thank you, and thank you, Chief, to be for the presentation. So you mentioned next steps. Has there been some thought about, it sounds like there'll be a second cohort. Is the idea to continue to do this, I don't know how often in a year, or do you have other thoughts on what could happen with the groups?
Yeah, in the theme of adaptability, we definitely want this to be a common, maybe either biannual or 3 times a year type of event, ideally in person. So it's much more experiential that way, but it is in the plans. And I guess the underlying tone there is it's going to be very adaptive to what the current events are, and really where the cohort in question at the time takes us. So yes.
Great. And then what would you say the expectations are for the participants in terms of like what did they say they wanted to get out of it? Did they get what they wanted to get out of it? Yes. What was some of the feedback?
Some of the quotes that were shared with me from some of the participants, this is secondhand, but it was quotes like, we really wanted to.
I'm sorry, can you speak up? Your mic is.
Okay, close to this.
There we go.
Yes, some of the participants, as it was relayed to me, shared some things like, we really wanted to hate you coming into this, but I find it hard to do that now. And I think it's not that we necessarily changed everyone's mind, and that wasn't the purpose of it, but I think it was just honest, raw conversations, right? And these are the conversations that are very hard to have online on a comment thread, very hard to have in a COVID environment. But I'm really proud of our staff to be able to pull it off and to do it in such a way that I'm confident that everyone who's part of this, even though the sessions are over, that they remain connected with us and have, they're one text message away from anyone that they met in the program to ask further questions should they have concerns or questions.
Great, thank you.
Great, thanks. Councilmember Ramirez.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. I think this is a great program, and I'm looking forward to seeing many residents participate. Just to, again, going back to demographics, I think there's a lot of value in making sure that many different communities within Mountain View are able to participate. And so I'm presuming that this is English driven. Are you looking at having cohorts that are conducted entirely in Spanish or Mandarin or other languages?
I think that's probably in like a phase 2 or 3 if we can pull it off. I think these first few was proof of concept, and knowing now that we're good to go. We certainly have the staff on hand that are bilingual and could likely pull it off. On the Mandarin side, I'm going to have to brush off a little bit of my Chinese school days, but definitely would be of interest of mine as well.
That's phenomenal. I'm glad to hear that. And then within the participants for the existing, or I guess the first cohort, is it a fairly racially and ethnically diverse group, or are you finding overrepresentation from certain groups? How are we sort of promoting it so that way we have a very good representation across the community?
Yes, it was quite a diverse group. The way we picked it, we wanted voices that were different than ours. And so actually, there's a few attendees in the audience now. I don't know if they want to share, but and so it was a cross section. So we made an effort to not make it just to find police supporters, if you will, but groups like MVCPRA and a lot of these the phone numbers that we got over the summer of people voicing very serious concerns. We kept tabs with them and invited them and say, would you like to take this next step and just have more conversations? And I'm really happy that they took us up on that offer.
That's great, thank you. And then final question, this is probably a little bit more challenging, but I know one of the challenges with great programs like Leadership Mountain View is they occur during work hours. You have to take a full day off, and so it's maybe less accessible to lower income people. And I think this is the kind of program that we would like to be accessible to everybody. So just maybe for our benefit, are these, this is a full day, right? Is it kind of like Leadership Mountain View in that respect? And are there ways that we can maybe try and find opportunities to accommodate the schedules of lower income people who may not be able to take a day off?
Yeah, actually the format for this one were evening, like after work hours, typically 2 to 3 hours, like on a Wednesday night. And then there were a few sessions that were longer on a Saturday or Sunday. But the feedback we got, I mean, that's a lot too, to kind of take a day, a Saturday away from somebody too. So we're continually kind of tweaking it and taking the feedback we got from the participants to then retool the next one and maybe, but to your point, we'll probably keep it after hours so we can get participation across the board.
Great, thank you very much.
All right. So I think that's our questions for you, Chief. We can move back to Mr. Gaines. Is that right?
Yeah, at this point, I'd actually like to introduce our research fellow who we recently brought on, Mr. Alex Stevenson. A lot of this is going to be repetitive again because we're talking about policing, and part of my report is discussing some of the things we're looking to further address, but we're very happy to bring on Mr. Stevenson as a research fellow. I'll allow him to introduce himself. Actually, I'll allow Deputy Chief Chris Young to introduce him because he's working as part of the police chief's office in concert with the city manager's office to explore policing matters. But with that, I'll allow Deputy Chief to give an introduction.
Thank you, Melvin. Yes, so over the last few months, many in the audience may have heard us allude to
We're so sorry. Can you lean forward or yell?
I will project.
Thank you.
Yes, over the summer, some of you may have heard us allude to a Stanford Fellow, and this was to help us understand data. And so our wonderful partnership with Stanford University, and I'll let Alex dive a little bit more into that, led to a process to look around and find a researcher who had a background and some expertise in this area. And really, the way it's going to work is Alex is reporting to the Office of the Chief. In my meetings with him, as you will find, is very intelligent, bright, and really he's been given unfettered access throughout the department. And our leadership has made it clear, wherever he wants to look, whatever data he wants to have, we've already been working with him to help him understand it, but more importantly, to help him give us advice on how to understand the data in a very scientific, rich kind of way. So I'm going to turn it over to Alex to let him introduce himself and maybe talk a little bit about the program as well.
Is everyone able to hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Is this an appropriate volume for everyone as well?
Yes, it is. Thank
Excellent.
you.
Well, it's very nice to meet all of you virtually. My name is Alex Stevenson. I'm a fifth-year PhD candidate at the University of California, Berkeley in the Department of Political Science. My substantive research focus are in the politics of security institutions. I originally came to grad school to look at civil-military relations and the design of military institutions, which is what my dissertation is on. But over the last 24 months, I have taken a fairly large research interest in policing, initially in a comparative perspective, but far more so recently, policing in America. Methodologically, I'm predominantly interested in causal inference, what we can learn, and more importantly, what we can't learn from observational data, as well as ways that we can potentially design programs that are appropriately, from a research design perspective, designed to give us actual causal answers to questions of interest. And so I understand this program, and part of the reason that I applied to it was that Hakeem Jefferson, who's a professor at Stanford University, is a person I have utmost respect for, and Anita Ravishankar, who I believe currently is working at the lab in DC, but is also a University of Michigan PhD, who I also have utmost respect for, were the primary reasons that I applied to the program. So I met the deputy chief as well as Audrey and Melvin later in the process, but the initial reason that appealed to me was that those are two individuals who I believe very strongly care quite a bit, not only about policing in America, but also about the communities that police. And so for me, this role was attractive, not just from a learning perspective, but also for a way to actually understand and hopefully provide some help in terms of information for police community relations for the benefit of the city of Mountain View. And I tend to think, and thus far my conversations within the office of the chief lead me to believe that that's something that the City of Mountain View Police Department cares about as well. So that's what drove me to the program. As the chief said, I thus far have had more or less unfettered access. I believe that to continue. I'm very grateful for that opportunity, and I think it shows at least a commitment at this stage. As I've explained to Deputy Chief and other leaders in the police department, my job, as I understand it, is to be disinterested in the best way possible, in that I'm to look at the data that exists, but also importantly, the data that does not exist in the department. And then also think of ways that we might be able to design interventions to improve not only community relations, but maybe improve other aspects of the department for the benefit of the community. Admittedly, this is my first local council meeting, so I'm not sure if I am open up for questions, if that's appropriate, but I'm more than happy to take any questions or turn it back to Melvin.
Well, I guess first we'll just say welcome. Thank you for coming to the subcommittee meeting. It sounds like you've hit the ground running with city staff, and now you can meet the three of us of our 7-member council. I'm not sure if my colleagues have any questions at this point, or I'm sure they just want to say hello as well. And thank you for joining us. And I think for myself, really interested in the data aspect. I think some of the questions you might have been hearing earlier from my colleagues, we're really looking at ways to disaggregate, if possible, truly understand both how the data is collected, what goes into that metric, but also what does that mean, right? What's the story, and being able to connect the dots to true policies is at least something of interest of mine. And so welcome. All right, I'll turn it back to Mr. Gaines.
Thank you. I am not on mute. So I am going to begin my presentation now on a recommended model of community police oversight for MVPD. Just give me a quick second, please.
Great, and I'll just remind those folks in the attendee box that have their hands raised, we're going to take public comment after all the presentations.
All right. Good evening again, continuing with our discussion of the RAI Action Plan police efforts. So as you all know, we started this effort early or late in the summer when we're caused by hundreds of thousands around the world who marched, rallied, and protested for racial equity and justice since the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis. Those calls for justice related to policing in the United States have also included calls for greater community oversight and accountability of police departments. Mountain View residents have expressed interest in creating a formal opportunity for community members to engage with MVPD, review MVPD policies and practices, as well as to participate in the decision-making related to law enforcement and the ways that MVPD operates. In June, this subcommittee expressed interest in exploring whether or not community oversight models were appropriate for Mountain View. And since then, staff has researched various community oversight models, discussed public safety matters with Mountain View stakeholders. We've worked with the cohort of Stanford University researchers, as well as some of our neighboring jurisdictions, city leaders from neighboring jurisdictions, to explore approaches to community and police oversight and other public safety matters. As I presented in August, I found that there are 4 primary models of police oversight. There are investigative agencies, auditing and monitoring agencies, temporary task forces, and review boards and commissions. With investigative agencies, the primary function of investigative agencies are to conduct independent investigations of complaints against police and to make findings on the validity of those complaints. Typically, they are staffed by professional investigators. And in some cases, they have the authority to make disciplinary decisions. And in other cases, they recommend disciplinary decisions to police chiefs. Normally, investigative agencies don't provide opportunities for additional public input. That's greatly due to the fact that they're dealing with personnel complaints, which are often confidential. Communities that often have investigative agencies are communities that have experienced the significant erosion of trust and goodwill, and sometimes have had controversial events. Considering auditing or monitoring agencies, those agencies are agencies which perform systematic reviews of police operations and internal investigations, and they ultimately make recommendations for how police agencies can improve. They hire professional auditors who would be those auditing the police operations, auditing the police personnel investigations, and then they'd make recommendations to the police chief and the elected officials, whether it be a city council or a board of supervisors, as well as a city manager or a city administrator. Again, the auditing and monitoring oversight body does not provide many opportunities for members of the public to provide their input into what occurs. And similar to the investigative agencies, communities that have auditing or monitoring agencies often lack trust and goodwill in the community police relations. And there is little room for the community and police to work collaboratively due to the erosion of that trust. Temporary task forces are normally a body that is formed for a fixed period of time and tasked with evaluating police department policies and practices. They're normally comprised of diverse community members, sometimes resident community members, other times community members who are representative of different professions, maybe people who are mental health professionals or people who represent the faith community or people who represent the activist community will participate in a task force. They also are essentially the body of task force members are those who are expected to make community input. So it's not common for non-task force members to have the opportunity to provide input to that body. So the meat of the input that is provided by task force are often only from task force members. Ultimately, task forces make recommendations to elected officials or city administrators or the police department. And of the communities that have task forces currently, I believe I highlighted Stockton, California, and Aurora, Colorado a couple months ago. They've experienced some controversial events that kind of call for an immediate in-depth overview of what's going on in that police department and the need for a very focused group to look at some issues and make a recommendation to come to some type of resolution within a limited period of time. The final body, which, spoiler alert, is my recommendation, is the review boards and commission models. They are diverse in their makeup, but ultimately they either inform and review police policies. and discuss public safety matters in order to make recommendations to improve public safety in a locality. Typically, they're comprised of resident community members, but there are many different types of review boards and commissions. Some review boards and commissions are appointed by police chiefs. Some review boards and commissions have members who are appointed by elected officials. And some community review boards are also kind of self-appointed. I provided an example of Melbourne, Florida, and that's actually a commission where it was more organic, and the community members formed that and then got that local city council to approve their articles of incorporation per se. That way the community members who have their own board is able to work in partnership with the police department and the city council. My point is there are various different types of community review boards and commissions. Typically, the common community factors of places that have review boards and commissions might have strained relations between the police department and the community, but normally they're not broken. There's room for improvement. And there are also opportunities for collaboration between the community and the police to be meaningful. And that's a lead to efforts that improve public safety and trust and transparency and accountability of the police department. In an effort to assess what community oversight model would be best for Mountain View, I ultimately had, look at it from the view that the best oversight model is that is the best fit for Mountain View's culture and addresses Mountain View's need. I pose the questions, where does public trust and accountability of MVPD need to be increased? And how might a community oversight body accomplish that increased public trust and accountability? In order to do that assessment, I examined Mountain View crime statistics, Mountain View Police Department's contact and use of force data, as well as community feedback on policing. Considering Mountain View crime statistics, I ultimately wanted to determine whether or not there are crime matters that suggest a need for additional oversight of MVPD. Looking at Mountain View crime statistics, you'll quickly notice that the predominant or most prominent type of crime in Mountain View are property crimes, burglaries and like auto burglaries and things of that matter. But ultimately, Mountain View is a relatively safe community, and there isn't much to suggest that the crime rates in Mountain View have led to a call for additional oversight of Mountain View. I don't think that additional oversight is merited based off of Mountain View crime. However, there are opportunities for an oversight body to be an additional way to enhance opportunities for Mountain View community members to share their experiences with crime, as well as to share their opinions about crime fighting efforts. And of the different community oversight bodies, the review boards and commission model, or at the recommendation I'm making, a public safety advisory body board would be the best fit to accomplish this. Looking at Mountain View Police Department contact data, again, asking the question, does contact data suggest the need for additional oversight? What the contact data shows, something that sticks out and something that we've heard many comments about in public meetings, is that people of Black and Hispanic races represent a larger proportion of Mountain View Police Department contacts than their proportion of Mountain View's population. That holds steady even when we control for the community that a person who was contacted by MVPD lives in, whether or not they're a Mountain View resident. while some can assume this means that there is bias in MVPD policing, the fact of the matter is we don't know yet. We don't know, and we're very interested in finding out. You've heard from Deputy Chief Shung today, and you've heard from Alex. We are actively looking at the data that exists, as well as trying to identify the data that doesn't exist and ways to collect it, because we are trying to answer this question. And again, once we find an answer to that question or have a report on that data, it would be a good opportunity for community members to provide input on that data and to tell the story of how that data, how they think we should respond to that data, as well as to share their experiences, because the data alone can, as we've seen from the HRC listening forums, the data tells one story, but people's experiences are valid as well. An oversight board where community members can share their concerns and make improvement recommendations would be an effective tool to enhance our efforts as we try to address any potential bias that exists. Looking at MVPD use of force data, the question very similar to contact data is, does the use of force data suggest the need for additional oversight? Ultimately, MVPD has a low use of force to arrest ratio. From 2015 to 2019, MVPD made 8,408 arrests. And of those 8,408 arrests, there are 145 documented uses of force, which is less than 2% of those interactions. There was a use of force. MVPD documents a use of force anytime either an officer reports that they used force, or when a person who was arrested or had an interaction with a police officer reports that that use of force was used or that they're injured. The types of force that are commonly used or that have been used of the Mountain View uses of force, uncontrolled takedowns were the most common use of force. And looking at some of the other uses of force that are concerning, they occur on much smaller rates. In fact, we've had in the last 5 years no firearm, carotid restraints, pepper spray, or canine uses of force, nor any major injuries or fatalities. Despite there being a low use of force to arrest ratio, that does not mean that there is not room for improvement. Does not mean there's not an opportunity to explore uses of force in Mountain View. It does not mean that there's not an opportunity for community input. We believe that a community advisory board can provide the opportunity for residents to look at MVPD use of force policies and provide feedback on those, and maybe provide some recommendations of ways to improve that policy. We've heard a lot tonight about community feedback on policing. You heard about the HRC, community listening forums on local policing, and you've heard about MVPDX. But we've also had a number of we've had a number of meetings, one-on-one meetings with community groups and one-on-one with community members to ask them about policing and to gauge their views and opinions about policing. And as you've heard earlier, there are desires in Mountain View to prevent police interactions that result in death or serious injury at the hands of police officer. There's positive interactions where people applaud MVPD in the way that MVPD officers act in public. And there's also many areas where we hear of negative interactions, and each of those comments or opinions are valid. And ultimately, the takeaway and community feedback on policing and whether or not that calls for additional oversight, the answer is yes, there's a desire for increased community input on policing matters. Considering all of those, that like in a trying to answer the question, where does public trust and accountability of MVPD need to be increased? And how might a community police oversight body accomplish increased public trust and accountability? What we know is we don't have extensive complaints that suggest the need for an investigative body or an auditing agency. Currently, the MVPD personnel complaints are audited by the city attorney's office, and it's a small number that we receive per year, so it's something that seems to be working. And we also don't have a significant amount of tension between MVPD and community members that suggest there's a high level of community distrust of MVPD. So I don't recommend a investigative agency or a auditing agency beyond our existing auditing model. We do have a number of community members who have had negative interactions with police. We have a number of community members who would like to see changes to MVPD's responses to mental health related calls for service. And as you've heard tonight, some community members would like us to modify how we operate in schools, whether or not school resource officers. These are all valid concerns that I believe we need to further discuss. And a task force, a temporary task force, could be an effective vehicle to explore these issues. But the recommendation to ultimately have a public safety advisory body is due to our belief that that better serves the community. It provides the opportunity for community members to discuss public safety matters and to learn more about public safety matters and to provide voice to the community as a whole on public safety matters. But it does so on a sustained basis as opposed to it being a focused 6-month effort. This is a sustained community advisory board that we are recommending. Not a forum to voice things necessarily, but a body that could evaluate, that can explore and examine policing issues and make recommendations. The Public Safety Advisory Board that we are suggesting would act solely in an advisory capacity. They don't write policy, that is the city council approved policy, but they can make recommendations on policy matters. So it would be tasked with holding public forums where they could receive additional community input beyond that of the members, but ultimately they'd have the opportunity to make recommendations for improvements. We suggest that the advisory body have up to 7 members appointed by the city council. And we also have some guiding principles of the type or the composition, that the composition of the advisory body should be. And it's basically appoint members who bring diverse representation to the body. Mountain View residents from different neighborhoods of varying ages, races, professions, cultures, etc., to ensure that the voice of the Public Safety Advisory Board is not homogenous and that it is inclusive and it includes people who might have different types of experiences and interactions with police departments, police officers. As far as the staffing of the Public Safety Advisory Board, this would operate as most advisory bodies do in Mountain View. We think that it should be staffed by 2 people. One of those people should be a member of the command staff of Mountain View Police Department, and another member should be a non-sworn, non-police department employee appointed by the city manager. Ultimately, we are looking for this subcommittee to provide input on 2 things. We want to know, 1, do you agree with our recommendation to create a Public Safety Advisory Board? And we'd also like to know any general feedback you have regarding the characteristics of the Public Safety Advisory Board. Depending on your input and your recommendations, we intend to present the recommendation to the full city council on December 1st. And if the city council approves the Public Safety Advisory Board, The city manager and police chief will appoint staff liaisons and will develop a recruitment plan and bring applicants back to the city council for appointment. And with that, that concludes my presentation. Figure out how to stop sharing my screen.
Great, thank you, Mr. Gaines. Do committee members have questions? Yes, Mayor Abe-Koga.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. Regarding the advisory board, this is more like logistical issues, but the recruitment, would we expect to add this to our recruitment process for our other advisory boards and commissions, or are we looking at a separate track for this?
The timing isn't perfectly worked out yet. However, we are anticipating this occurring once the advisory body is approved by the city council. We would immediately develop a recruitment plan. That probably would require appointment of members at a time that is different from other advisory bodies. However, eventually the appointment process would catch up to other advisory bodies and we'd be able to do them together.
Okay, yes, so if it's okay to make comments, that would be the preference, is to try to get all of these commissions in sync. We have a few that are out of sync right now, and we've discussed this as the Appointments Review Committee, but we'd like to try to get it in sync so it's frankly just more efficient and less staff time. And then is there a thought as to how often this advisory board would meet? As I know some of our commissions meet twice a month, some meet once a month, some meet, I think that's it, but we could be open to other frequencies.
Yeah, and we initially we would probably start with a monthly meeting. This isn't finalized yet, but we're thinking a monthly meeting initially, and then maybe that could be bi-monthly meetings depending on the work plans that are provided.
And I see the city manager. Go ahead, Ms. McCarthy.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Kamei. Yes, so Mayor Abe-Koga, I think as far as the timing and how often the advisory board would meet, I think that is really going to depend on what we have going on in terms of what the advisory body is going to discuss initially. So I think you mentioned that their advisory bodies meet at different times. And so I see that this body would probably meet over time a few times a year. I don't know if it would meet monthly like all of the other advisory bodies do, because not all of them meet monthly, or I should say like some of the advisory bodies do. I think it's really going to depend on what we have on the agenda, what's happening. So I don't necessarily want to commit now to an exact time, but I think certainly it would meet frequently, but I think we would have to iron out exactly how often it would meet.
So then, are you looking for suggestions on what topics might be covered by the advisory board, or will you staff come up with that later, or are you expecting once the board, if it's actually formed, to come up with the topics?
Thank you, Mayor. So yes, I think we do have an idea based on a lot of the feedback that has come out of this subcommittee on what some of the most pressing topics would be coming out of this. So we certainly hear that there's a lot of demand for further discussion about the mental health aspect, or calls for service for homelessness related calls. So I think that's certainly something that would be discussed. Just general relationships with the community. I think that's something that's coming out of this too. We have already changed many of our use of force policies, but I think that's something that could be explored further. So I do think that a lot of topics have come out of this subcommittee meetings over the last several months, but that is something that I think we will work to recommend as the months go forward, what the topics would be. But I definitely think there's a lot that we can tackle once the board gets going.
Great, thank you. Yes, if I can add comments. So my thought was, since our subcommittee is actually ad hoc, at some point it will come to an end. But a lot of these issues that we are exploring are going to take more time. So my thought was that perhaps this advisory board, if it's formed, can continue in the work. The other question I had was, when we talk about public safety, we've been focused on police here, but the reality is we cover fire and EMS under the heading of public safety. So should we clarify that? Should we actually change the name of this advisory board to be more reflective of what we are discussing, or was there thought about covering those other departments as well?
There was thought, not specifically to get into fire and EMS as a public safety matter. However, in regards to some of the discussions we're having about policing, right? If you're going to discuss whether or not the police department should be responding to mental health, then that mental health response could become a public safety response that is not really related to police. So that's why we wanted to leave it at public safety, because it's more encompassing of the different things that we may discuss.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think if we can just clearly define what the purpose or the responsibilities are, then that would be helpful, so that I don't want us to like overextend. So yeah, so let's just define that. Great, thank you.
Great, thanks. Councilmember Ramirez.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of quick questions, and I think, Melvin, you touched on some of these during the presentation. So the first, there's a lot of, I think, really valuable quantitative and qualitative information in the report. One thing that I think we didn't dive too deeply into is the complaints that have been, I guess, submitted related to MVPD. Do you happen to have statistics for the complaints and how many of them were sustained?
Yes. We were able to look at MVPD personnel complaints from 2016 through 2019. And in that period, there were 29 personnel complaints. Of those 29 personnel complaints, 10 were initiated internally, like not by a resident, initiated by members of the police department. And of those internally initiated complaints, 7 were sustained. Of the 19 civilian initiated complaints, 1 was sustained. In 7 of those instances, the personnel complaints were determined to be false allegations after the police department reviewed the officer-worn camera footage. In 5 instances, the officer's actions were in adherence with the department policy. And in 5 instances, the complainants actually decided not to cooperate with future investigations. So none of those were sustained. 19 complaints from 2016 through 2019, of which 1 was sustained.
Got it. Thank you. And just to clarify, so part of the rationale for not recommending something like an auditing or monitoring function is there just isn't the volume of complaints to really sustain that kind of functionality. Is that right?
Yes. So were we to have an independent investigator looking at MVPD personnel complaints, right now that person might be able to look at, if you're looking at the average of the number of complaints we receive per year, that independent investigator would be investigating 5 complaints per year based off of current trends. Similarly, with auditing, an auditing agency, were we to create a department or have an independent auditor review the investigation complaint processes and proceedings, they would also be looking at about 5 instances per year. Our city attorney's office currently provides that service to us, and we believe that that's sufficient right now.
Got it. Okay.
And I
Oh.
see City Manager McCarthy. Go ahead.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Kamei. I would also note that a more investigative and auditing function is very much not community involved at all, in the sense that it tends to be someone that the city would contract with to provide that, and then the public may or may not get the results depending on the legalities of it all, or what the auditor investigator would find. So I think what we were really looking for and what we were striving for was the more collaborative model, to where it would be more interaction between the community and the police department, as opposed to a more outside function.
Got it. Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. And then, so I think you did a good job sort of touching on this as well in the presentation. The primary difference between a task force and the body that staff is recommending that we create is that this new body could be sustained over time, as opposed to a time-limited task force. So in every other respect, they're functionally equivalent.
Functionally, yes. A task force would probably, by design, include more people initially. Like other cities who have task forces have like 13 to 20 task force members who are focused on these matters for that fixed period of time. What we're recommending is a body of up to 7 members who would be exploring policing issues and making recommendations on public safety matters, but on a sustained basis. Additionally, they'd hold public forums where members of the community can come in and make a comment on any public meeting and raise an issue that they weren't privy to.
Got it. Okay. Thank you very much. That's all I have.
Great, thank you. So I think given that these are the questions, we can move on to public comment after this. So I will, so our meeting is scheduled to end at 7. So in order to ensure that we are able to hear from all speakers and make sure that we progress through the meeting, speakers will be allowed up to 90 seconds to speak. So I know we have a few hands raised, but if not, please feel free to raise your hand in the Zoom or press *9 on your phone. And may I ask if Ms. Seymour Ramberg, you might keep time again? Great, thank you very much for your willingness. Okay, and I see Bruce, you're already in.
Yes, I am.
Okay, there you go.
Okay, I just have a couple of things, thank you. So I participated in MVPDX and also the HRC sessions, and I just wanted to comment that the discussions that took place within MVPDX and in the HRC sessions were somewhat different regarding the take on the status quo. And I'm just saying that because you might need to contend with that ultimately, your subcommittee in some way. That said, forming this advisory body sounds very good to me, but how it's set up is going to be crucial. I served on the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee for a number of years, and there are always questions of effectiveness, like how much is the feedback that comes from the advisory bodies paid attention to? It varies quite a bit, and I'd like to see that strengthened across the board for all advisory bodies. But if this one is formed, it's going to be important that what they feedback is actually used and put into play where appropriate. And on the question of whether it should be public safety and not just the police department, I totally agree with that for the reasons stated. It's the question really does cover the fire department and emergency services and mental health services and a variety of other things that have been talked about within the community. And so I really urge you to make this full public safety in its scope. And also mention that Sunnyvale, their police department falls within a department that's comprehensive like that. I think it's actually called the Public Safety Department. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Bruce. All right, Reba Cohen. Oh, did you? I think I see. It's okay.
That's
Okay,
right.
Alexander Brown.
Oh, I didn't expect to go so early. Hey, all right. So first off, I also was a member of MVPDX cohort 1, and I want to thank Wally, Armando, Mike, Saul, and especially Katie for putting it on. I really appreciate the time and effort that they put into it. I don't recall anyone saying they came in expecting to hate the PD. But yeah, I hope that going forward that the subsequent cohorts are going to get more focused on real feedback, because though I appreciate all the information that I and my fellow cohort members gained, I don't feel like it functioned as a two-way street. For tonight, I think that the recommendation for a more holistic view, acknowledging the diversity of agencies that serve the function of public safety, is great. But I think that a body that has oversight needs to have some authority and some teeth in order to get buy-in from the members and also trust in the community. I too have noticed that advisory bodies for the city tend to struggle to be heard by council often, and that often leads to disillusionment on the part of the members and also of the public. So I think that having more authority is going to be a better way to set up an institution that is trusted by Mountain View's community going forward. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, Reba Cohen. Please feel free to unmute yourself. Reba, are you there? Reba Cohen? Please feel free. You can just unmute yourself.
Yeah, I didn't have a comment. I don't know.
Oh, okay. Okay. Your hand was raised, but I think we have a way of lowering it. All right. All right. And Misty Marienberg, I think this is the same Alexander Brown as before. I think. All right. Does anyone else have any comments? All right. Seeing none, I will move it back to the panel. Councilmember Ramirez.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to go ahead and move the staff recommendation. I think it's a very good start. There's a lot of data that we're still collecting that needs to be parsed through. I think it'll be helpful to have an ongoing body rather than a term-limited body, just because we know that there are a number of complex matters that we'll have to address, and it will take some time. I think it's been a challenging year. I had a conversation with a member of city staff earlier, and we were talking about the complexity of the issues that we're contending with, and between housing issues, COVID response, the racial equity and justice issues that we're working on. It's not all going to be resolved at one time, and I think having a sustained community body that looks at these issues and makes recommendations to the council, has access to staff and is supported by staff. I think that's a great start. Just for whatever it's worth, I'm not opposed. I think auditing generally is an important concept. We've talked about this, I think, in our goal setting a while back. So it's not something that I think we should not consider at all. But I think Melvin provided some very helpful statistics about whether there's a need for it right now. But just as a concept, I think it's something that we might want to explore over time as the the data justifies it. But the staff recommendation, I think, is a strong one. I really appreciate the work that you've all put into this, and I look forward to seeing the work that this new body will do and the recommendations that it'll bring to council. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mel. Thank you, Councilmember Ramirez. Mayor Abikoga, did you want to? Okay, go ahead.
So I guess I will second the motion, the staff recommendation. And I just want to thank staff for all of your hard work over the last several months on the various issues that we've been discussing. And I want to thank our public members too who have participated in this. You know, I a little disappointed. We started out with probably 50 people, we're down to 17, but I also understand that, you know, life goes on, and that's why we are here and we do the work that we do, understanding that a lot of these issues are complex and they take time. And I think we, you know, said that in the very beginning, and where we are now, we are really beginning to engage, or really kind of getting at the tip of the iceberg. And these issues are going to take more time. For instance, you know, I've been doing quite a bit of learning it myself over the last several months, and this issue of mental health providers and alternative service delivery model. Though it sounds, you know, it sounds like easy. You know, folks refer to Oregon often and the cahoots model. I've discovered it's actually quite complex because of our relationship with the county. You know, the county, as someone mentioned, yes, the county has a program, but they are unable to staff it adequately. There's funding issues. I know that we've begun to look at whether we could do something on our own. There is a nonprofit who is looking at trying to launch a pilot program. You know, if we want to talk about just in terms of the delivery and the vehicles, you know, if rather than having folks transported in police cars, let's say we wanted ambulances to transport them. Well, the issue is the ambulances is not a city run program. It's run by the county that contracts out to a private provider. So there are a lot of layers to all of this. And so we have to really, you know, unpack all of this to really be able to decide, figure out what can work for us. So it's an ongoing, very detailed issue. And I'm glad that we are engaging in this. I'm also glad that, you know, in light of, it's been challenging for me because I, you know, understand the national tenor, what's happened nationally, and we, you know, I think we all want to be mindful and respectful of that, but we've, you know, we've been trying to relay that to what's happening in Mountain View. And I think the story, and, you know, I appreciate the stories that have come out, but you look at the data, the stories, we're a very different situation. We're not Minneapolis and we're not Atlanta, we're Mountain View. And, you know, I've spent the last 4 months, frankly, walking the streets, reaching out to people, participating in forums, and I've heard from a lot of people. And frankly, it's been mostly positive. I had a gentleman just out of the blue to say to me a couple of weeks ago, you know, I have to hand it to Mountain View. We have the best police department and fire department around. So, you know, that's the story that I've also heard, and I think it's important to, you know, to acknowledge all of that. We as council members have to represent the entire city. You know, appreciate the folks who've been engaging in this, but again, there's different perspectives out there, and we frankly hear from a lot of people, and I think we try to have our finger on the pulse of this community. And so what I've heard has reaffirmed my impression of our police department, that it is a you know, well-run organization. But of course, there's always room for improvement. And that's why I support this idea of an ongoing advisory board. I don't want to do something just because of some incident that occurred. I want something that is continuous, and I think, you know, the issues that I would like to see incorporated into the work would be the issues that we have talked about. It could be, and I remember, well, and I don't know where the HRC is on this, but when I was on the HRC almost 20 years ago, it was actually a time when the HRC was trying to find things to do. And one of the areas that we took on was racial profiling. That's, the terminology may have changed, but perhaps that could be shifted to this advisory board. I know there was, talk about interest about budgeting. We can include that. The mental health issue provision piece can be incorporated. And then one request I would have, however, is that the appointees, if we can do this, I would ask them, or I don't know if we can make it a requirement, but that they participate in MVPDX. And I look at this advisory board as, a very important when it's to get resident perspective, opinions, but also I hope that from a deeper dive into how public safety is administered in our city, these residents can also be, like we talked about, ambassadors to the larger community. Because the reality is I think this idea of public safety is kind of a mystery to many people. There's not a lot of, and I don't expect folks to understand the ins and outs. I mean, it took me quite a few years to really delve into, how does the fire department work? How does EMS work? How does the police department work? So I would hope that this advisory board could help in educating the community about what public safety is and how it's administered in our cities. I wanted to say to the Bruce England's comments about advisory boards and commissions, I take them very seriously. I served on two myself. And so I've always been very cognizant of the recommendations that our advisory boards and commissions bring to us as council members. But I do also, having been on the commissions and now on council, understand the difference, and that the advisory boards and commissions are in fact that, they're advisory, they provide recommendations. Ultimately, however, the job of the council, it's the job of the council to set the policy and make the decisions based on the recommendations we received. So I just want to be clear that I hear this desire to have more authority, but it's just how the system is set up. It's really the council that has to make the policy. So, there's always opportunity every 2 years to run for council if that's of interest for folks. So I just I want to clarify that. But again, thank you to our staff. Thank you to my colleagues on this committee. This is great work that's been done. I'm very proud of the work that's been done. And I look forward to making this recommendation to the full council. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Ramirez, I see your hand up. Is that again, or do you have more?
Sorry about that. So one thing that the mayor said that inspired me to remember something that I wanted to include, and that's, I think the demographic data that we're collecting is very important to me, and it's important to all of us because there may be different communities within the city who have different perspectives, and sort of putting all of the input in one category without being able to distinguish who said what can have the effect of sort of eliminating a key voice, right? If we're finding one community. And I think what you had said, Audrey, about the forum that was conducted in Spanish is particularly important, because that's a community that's a little bit more challenging to reach, and may have some thoughts that are different from what you may hear in the English forum, for instance. And so making sure that we do as good a job as we can to make sure that we're not losing those voices in the input that's being provided. But beyond that, I think this is a very good start. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. So before I get into my kind of comments, I do want to echo the thanks to our staff, to our HRC, and to the public. I've been reflecting a lot actually since we've been put back into this purple tier. And I would say, one of the things I think about often is kind of what we've tried to create as a tagline through this pandemic, which is Together MV. And I'm really hoping that the recommendation that this subcommittee, will put to the full council is a product of Together MV. the 4 listening sessions, the events through the library, MVPDX. I hope this is a way for our community to come together. And in light of the tragedies that have been occurring in 2020, I would also say COVID, the COVID pandemic, disproportionately affects people of color and communities of color, right? So I just don't want that to be lost. I know a big focus has been on policing, but I think that at least for myself, I'm interested in all of the inequities that we're facing in our community, and how we can do that holistically. So in that vein, I just wanted to ask staff, as we're thinking about this item coming back to the full council, I think it would be helpful to also understand the timeline of this ad hoc subcommittee. So, we've talked about equity-based budgeting. We're talking tonight about this public safety advisory body. We've, talked about a couple of different things. And so I think in terms of just providing that transparency to the public, are there things on our work, kind of our just work plan, loosely, that we will continue to work on, or is this sunsetting? Ad hoc subcommittees tend to sunset. And so just providing some clarity. That doesn't need to happen tonight. That's why this is a comment, but I think it'd be really important for that kind of work to continue. And perhaps if it's not at the ad hoc subcommittee, is it when we're looking at council goal setting next year? So just wanted to plant that seed, because I think what I'm also hearing from our community is the call to action. So not only the words, but also the actions behind it. And so I just wanted to say, since the ad hoc subcommittee is called about race, equity, and inclusion, I think that still is a very important aspect. So just wanted to kind of put that out there. I think in terms of the staff recommendation, appreciate particularly Mr. Gaines walking us through the thought process of staff. And I'd like to also say, I think I'll be supporting the staff recommendation as well. And I think it's also that this is a first step. I see this as the first step, and the city will continue to do many different things in conjunction with setting up this advisory body. So, should the data that Mr. Stephenson is working on, in conjunction with the recommendations of the advisory board, point us in a different direction in terms of what the city should do, I think the council would be open to hearing to that. So I would say this is, to me, yes, just an initial moving in what I think is the right and correct direction, but we also have the ability to pivot if need be. I like that it is the full council will be appointing a 7-member body, and I really appreciate the idea that we have people from a variety of backgrounds and ages. I think, one of the listening sessions did include youth, and we have a youth advisory commission. I don't know if that would be something of interest to them, but serving as the Council of the Youth Subcommittee chair, I would love to see more youth engagement. And that's just one example, right? So I do think that there's a variety of perspectives that can come into that body. So I think I answered both questions 1 and 2, and hopefully that gives staff enough food for thought. And then I think just to circle back to something I said earlier, which is, I did attend the first portion of the report out last night. I know not all of my colleagues had that opportunity. I know that will be available before the December 1st council meeting, but for anybody who doesn't have that information, I think trying to put that up would be very helpful. I also think perhaps looking at, I think Councilmember Ramirez and the mayor touched on this a little bit, our outreach methods. It sounds about like 200 or so people participated in the various forums, but our population is near 90,000 people. So I really want to make sure that we are meeting people where they are. So whether it's the scheduling of the times for the MVPDX or the outreach methods, I think that would be, that deserves some thought as well. And then I know that there will be there's a recommendation, I think, for police command staff, as well as someone from the city manager's office to staff the advisory body. I think it'd be helpful too for maybe the public to understand what command staff means. I think that's a pretty at least to me, that's kind of this term. And I would want to better understand if I'm, going to be on this body, what that really means, because I want to make sure my voice is heard, right? So I think perhaps just putting that in for the December 1st report could be helpful. All right. Yes, Mayor Abekoga, I see your hand. I think you just have to unmute.
There we go. Thank you. So you brought up a great point, Chair, about this subcommittee and our mission. And I believe in the very beginning, we did lay out a list of areas we wanted to cover. And, one, we've made some progress, for instance, on the equity budget, equity-based budgeting. The council approved that the other night at a council meeting. My understanding was, I think we talked about like land use, and some of the concepts are to be incorporated with, I believe, our R3 zoning changes. So perhaps it would be helpful for the December 1st council meeting if there could be a mention of what has been accomplished already, and then a list of what we still would like to look at moving forward, and that can help us decide how much longer this committee should continue, and in what other way we will address those issues that were brought up. One thing I just wanted to mention too, and I know we're past time, but the public talked about SROs, and I wanted to, this is something I realized, was that we have two high schools in Mountain View and Los Altos high schools that our students attend. My understanding is our police department jurisdiction is from Mountain View High School, but Los Altos High School is actually under Los Altos PD, police department. So I just want to make sure that that distinction is understood, because it's not all about what our police department is doing. And we do have a neighboring city that that covers the schools that some of our students go to. So I just want to clarify that as we look at more closely at this topic of SROs. And my understanding is that the high school board is looking at the issue, but they have not made a decision, and it's really up to them to decide what they want to, if they want to continue or not. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mayor. And I saw some heads nodding from our police department on that, so they concur. If there's any other discussion on this item 5.1. Okay, so seeing none, I'll move on to item 6, which is subcommittee staff comments. Is there anything anyone would like to add?
I'm sorry, did we actually vote on the item?
Oh, sorry, I'm just trying to end on time. So there was a motion and there was a second. Thank you, Mayor. And then I need to do public comment on the motion. So if there are any folks in the attendee box who have public comment, if we
actually no, you just need to, it's a discussion amongst the.
Okay, so I think we had a fruitful discussion. So Ms. Seymour Rainberg, could you do the?
Yes, roll call vote on the motion. Chair Kamei?
Yes.
Member Abekoga?
Aye.
Member Ramirez?
Yes.
The motion carries.
Great. All right, now I can move us on to item 6, subcommittee staff comments. Does anyone have any? All right, so seeing none, I will move us to item. Yes.
Sorry, Chair. Just one really quick question about, so my understanding is this is our final meeting, right? Or is there an intention to know that there are more meetings planned?
So Councilmember Ramirez, this is the final meeting for this year. And I think as the Vice Mayor noted, we will bring back the staff report on December 1st. And I believe the Mayor noted also there are certain things that we will make sure that we will incorporate in the December 1st staff report. And so if there are still remaining items that we need the subcommittee to provide feedback on, or we want to make sure that you have the information to then provide a recommendation to council, then I think we would look at that probably in the earlier part of 2021. But at this point, we don't have the actual meeting planned, but we would certainly make that public well in advance and determine what might be on the agenda for that once we bring forth everything on December 1st.
Got it. Thank you.
Great. All right. So anyone else? Okay. Seeing none, I'll move to item 7, which is adjournment. And this meeting is adjourned at 7:05 p.m. All right. Thank you very much to everyone. Really appreciate it. And I think I won't see everyone. So have a happy Thanksgiving. Stay safe. Stay inside.
Thanks, everyone. Take care. Be
Bye.
safe.
Hi, are we still broadcasting?